What's up, everybody? Eddie Barco here with the Nebula Music Podcast, and today I'm excited to be speaking with Taylor Robinson. Now, if you've never heard of Taylor, he's an amazingly talented drummer who's played for some very big artists, went to Berklee, and he's just, frankly, one of the most talented drummers I've spoken to this day. But not only that, I think Taylor is one of the wisest musicians that I've ever spoken to. Our conversation got very deep, and in ways that I didn't expect that it would go. But frankly, I am very impressed by Taylor's approach to life. And it's something that a lot of musicians, myself included, we don't get that much time to really think about life, to really think about approaching life and how we overcome obstacles. And I think it's something incredibly vital to our success. I don't want to waste any more time. I'm excited about this conversation. Let's just dive right in. All right, guys, thank you so much for joining me again. I am very excited to have this guy on my episode because, he's just a phenomenal drummer, to be honest, but we got a chance to talk over the phone, and I'm super excited to talk with Taylor Robinson. Dude, how are you?
I'm doing great, man. How are you?
Dude, I'm great, man. You know what? For those of you guys who do not know, well, obviously you won't know because I didn't talk about it, but we've actually been trying to get this interview set up for a little bit. And last time we had Skype issues. So I'm excited to finally get a chance to talk with you. That's insane how all these forces are trying to make sure that we don't, which means this conversation is going to be a good one. I can just tell.
This is it. It's finally happening. Yeah, man, I'm stoked. It was, it seemed like everything was standing in the way for a while. And, so glad to make it happen.
But we persevered. So honestly, I don't want to waste any time. I'm sure people already know who I am, so I want them to get to know you. So Taylor, why don't you go ahead and catch us up a little bit? Let us know maybe where you got started, where you're from, school stuff, and then we'll take it from there.
Sure. Yeah. Obviously you mentioned this. I'm a drummer. I've been playing drums, more or less my whole life. My dad was a drummer, so I got started very early, kind of playing on his drums. And my parents split up when I was really young, and me and my mom moved to Florida. And pretty much as soon as we got there, one of the first things I realized is wait, there used to be a drum set in the house. Where is it? And I was, I think I was 3 years old, and I was just drums. I want to do drums. And my mom was kind enough and patient enough to get a 3-year-old a drum set. And she got me drum lessons and also made me take piano, which was such an awesome thing. Nice. For her to know to do.
That's a good combo, by the way. I've known plenty of good drummers that know piano really well, myself included. Not trying to toot my own horn, but I took piano lessons too. So, hey.
Yeah. It totally, I don't know. It was just a well-rounded introduction to music, and I remember I dabbled for a little bit with violin, and I tried a bunch of stuff. I knew from a really young age, oh, I like this, Pretty much any time I was doing anything music related, I was having a good time. And so anyway, I've been playing for a long time and sort of grew up. Some of my first, the first time I was really playing in front of people was, I grew up playing in church, and I did that for a lot of years. And I've talked about this before in podcasts. It made such a difference for me. From a really young age, having that, because I think a lot of kids don't, they'll start a band with their friends, or maybe they'll play in concert band in school or jazz band in school. But for me, it was I got kind of thrown into the deep end where there were they had really great musicians at that church, and I had to go in and be the drummer and be expected to know what it meant to lead a band and all that.
Was there no drummer? Did your mom just volunteer you?
No, there was a few drummers, but I was hanging around. And, I had been at that point, I was, I think 8 or 9 when I started hanging out there. And maybe 9 or 10 when they finally let me get on the drums. And yeah, I just really wanted to do it. And I think they put me on the spot. It was a funny story. It was the first time I was so nervous, and I get up there and I did all right. I did the song, I kept the beat, everything was good. And I remember I thought it was the end of the song, and I was like, "This is my moment. I'm going to my giant Metallica ending, cymbals and all of this, and the drums and the toms and everything." And then I realized it was the bridge.
Oh God.
And so that was, it was a pretty funny first experience, and I think it only got better from there.
You started off with a bang.
Yeah, for sure. But anyway, yeah, and then I was super into band and all that when I was in school. I did jazz band, concert band, and in middle school, I had shout outs to Troy Jones. I had one of the greatest band directors in the world. He was just phenomenal, and I ended up going to the high school where he was in charge of the drum line, and did drum line there with Silver Magic Drumline at Mariner High School in Cape Coral, Florida, and then got into Berkeley and went and did that whole thing, which was like insane. So been doing this, my whole life. It's like as long as I can remember. You ask, I'm 25 now. If you asked me when I was 13 what I do, I'd have the same answer.
Wow. Can I ask you something like, did you know early on that you wanted to pursue music as a career, or was that something that you figured out maybe like closer to the end of high school?
Well, yeah. I mean, when you're that age, it's like, at least for me, I had a bunch of different stuff. Like drums was for sure like my passion, but I had other stuff I was interested in. Like I had a scholarship to go study environmental science at FGCU. I really thought about going into science in some capacity for a long time. Yeah, it was just something I was super interested in growing up. And I grew up like diving and always out on the water, and Florida boy. And,
dude, you're a badass. Damn, dude.
I don't know about all that, but yeah, it was. I got to 17, and I was like, I had been gigging and stuff, and I was just like, man, I can't. It really came down to what I couldn't live without. Like I could live without being a scientist. I didn't feel at that time that I could live without pursuing my career in music. Like it's like, you only have so much time. And this is one thing I felt like it wasn't an option for me not to do it in my own mind,
Interesting. And I guess I'm fascinated by that because a lot of us have been 17 before. At least I'm hoping most of us that are a little older went through 17. And I think when you're at that age, right, at high school, and, there's so much pressure that, applying to college and figuring out what you want to do with your life, which is a conversation for another time. But you know what? Like, it's kind of weird to pressure like someone so young to figure out what you want to do for 50 years.
I think about that all the time. Yeah. It's insane. Right? It's insane.
It's insane. But I guess what I'm curious is like studying music, when you have this passion, right, to like do something that you just love, but at the same time, you're also equally good with many other things. It's curious to me if there was maybe someone else, like an adult figure, maybe your mom or someone that, like a role model that you had that really pointed you in the right direction. And with that in mind, Berkeley, in mind, it's like one of the top music schools ever, up there with Juilliard and stuff. And so like, it's interesting to me how you decided to pursue music and then go to Berkeley. Was there someone that helped you along the way?
Yeah, it was absolutely my mom. She passed away a few years ago. But growing up, she was just like a phenomenal parent. I remember I never had the things that I wanted. I always had the things I needed, so if it was like, I remember, birthdays or Christmases would come around and I'd be like, Mom, I want an Xbox. I want an Xbox. And she would be like, okay, you can have an Xbox so you can have any snare drum. And she was always trying to get me to realize that there was only so much time and resources, and you should spend that on things that give you returns,
Interesting.
And so it's like, it's not like the sort of thing where it's like, look, I was a kid and sometimes I just wanted to go have fun and do fun things. But I think from a really young age, everything for her, she was also an assistant principal. So like she was very keyed into the process of growing up and maturing and how the decisions you make, especially in middle school and high school, it's like, that's such a foundational period of your life when you start to really understand the impact of the decisions you make and how you spend your time. And
Right.
so that was huge. Like my mom taught me, I mean, literally, I think about things all of the time, you know, just like being in elementary school, and she would drop me off to school and be like, be respectful, do your best, you know, and just stuff like that was like, and I mean, every single day when she dropped me off, be respectful, do your best, work hard, you know, and just that sort of, I don't know, it just like built a foundation for me of, knowing that really you can do anything you want to do as long as you're willing to put in the work and the time, to be successful at it, you know? So, which is, you know, I think like a good life lesson. And she was great. She totally pushed me. I mean, I used to practice when I was, you know, in high school and stuff. I would practice 4 hours a day, pretty much religiously. Like if I missed a day, I would do 5 hours for the next 4 days to make up for the hours that I missed, which is like insane for like a 15-year-old kid. But between her and Mr. Jones, I had so much pressure to be good at this, and not just like, you know, not in some weird way. I also wanted it, but like she used to, you know, be at home and have to deal with 4 hours of drumming, and she eventually took part of our garage and built this like emphasis on semi soundproof room for me to just sit in there for as long as I wanted and shed drums. And so, yeah, I owe, between my mom and Mr. Jones, I owe just about everything I have now and have done and will do to those two people. So
If I can ask, and maybe this is digging a little bit too deep, but how long ago was it since your mom passed away? I'm just curious.
Book, man, it's all right. She passed away in 2009, so I was 17. It was between junior and senior year of high school. She had cancer for, she fought it for like 7 years. You want to talk about a badass? She was a badass.
Moms usually are the most badass people on this planet.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I think about it all the time. Like whenever I'm like tired, I think about her and I'm just like, you're such a, you know, I don't know what I can say and not say on the podcast, but I'm always just like, you know, you are not tired. Keep working.
Yeah.
But yeah, she had cancer for like 7 years. And, when she passed away, it was like this super, super intense thing for me, because I didn't have any brothers or sisters, and I didn't actually really get to know my dad until after that. And so, you know, it was tough, you know, but it's like anything, man. It's just like life is not easy, I don't think, for anyone. You know, I think as a person who's like gone through some intense stuff, you know, this happens to everyone at some point in your life. Like the challenges are different. You know, it might be a death in the family, or it might be something else. You know, it could be anything. But I think it's like how you deal with those situations, right? So,
absolutely. I mean, you brought up a couple things in that last couple statements that it really fascinate me and that I agree with too. The one thing you just said, which is like kind of how you see things, which is so true. It's a common theme I see with a lot of the musicians that I interview, most of them being very successful at what they're doing, yourself included, is you bring up a good point. You know, shitty stuff does happen. I mean, that's what life is a gigantic mess of just up and downs. And you can choose to dwell on the downs or choose to dwell on the ups. And that's really my opinion on what defines a successful person. But I really do want to nail in the coffin what you said earlier too, how, and by the way, this podcast is open. You can say almost anything you want, because that's what I love about conversations. But it's so true when you said you're not tired. A little bit about my backstory, Taylor. I come from an immigrant family. You know, like my family comes from Guatemala. So I grew up relatively, you know, low income, that kind of the thing. But like my dad is probably the bravest, hardworking man I've ever known. You know, he didn't really go to school, but I think about that whenever I'm tired or, you know, I don't want to do something. I train myself to remind myself, hang on, where was my dad at my age? Like, I am blessed enough to fucking play music for a living. You know what I mean? And my dad at my age was worried about feeding 4 kids. Yeah. It's insane to really think about. And I think what you said is something that most musicians and most creative people trying to do something with their career should always remember, whether or not you have, immigrant parent or whatever, to remind yourself that we have it good no matter what. And there's always someone that has it worse. And that if you have legs, if you have the time, if you're awake, alive, if you're not in bed, with a sickness, you have time and you have energy to get shit done.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely, man. And it's totally it's like you said, it's about perspective. I'm sure that a lot of people that listen to this podcast, maybe they're looking for some perspective on drums or something they hadn't thought about when they're approaching their instrument. The reality is, it's like you can learn. I can teach you a cool fill or a great feel idea, but a better lesson is about the perspective on hard work. It's like people that are feeling like frustrated with their playing or whatever. All of that comes down to just put the fucking work in, man.
Yeah.
Just work as hard as you possibly can all the time. And you might not see the improvement in a day, but you will see it in a year. 100% you'll see it. And other people will too, So yeah, man, I totally agree.
And one more question regarding this topic, just to kind of bring around the circle. And so your mom, something like that is obviously very traumatic, and no one even knows how to deal with it the perfect way. The fact that she passed away when you were relatively young is interesting to me, because then after that you went off to Berkeley. And so I'm curious how that event affected your last year in high school and the transition from high school to, Berkeley and basically pursuing your passion. Is that, would you say, like the main driving force of what made you want to go after it? Or was it just a combination of other things?
Well, yeah, yes and no. When she passed, when that happens, you have 100 people. I remember we're at my house every day. People were just so because she was an assistant principal. She was like a leader in the community, and we had people from the school system, and we had friends, and we had people from the church that were always just there. And after a couple of weeks, I was like, man, I'm getting the hell out of here. And I went to Berkeley for their 5-week program because I needed to get away for a little while. And yeah, it was definitely. I remember going there and. It hadn't even dawned on me, how intense it was. I remember meeting this guy, Finnegan Singer, who's a phenomenal guitar player. He's playing on my record. He played in my old band, Cosmodrome. He's one of my best friends in the world. I remember one of our first conversations where I was like, yeah, my mom passed away. Him being like, oh, when did that happen? I was like 2 weeks ago.
Oh my God.
And being at Berkeley, trying to do all of that and just separate myself a little bit from what had happened. Anyway, long story short, got a scholarship to Berkeley when I was there and came back and still had to do my senior year of high school, living with some friends of my mom's, and it was intense, man. And it was really tough too. When something like that happened, I got real tired of, people would see me and then you would just see it in their eyes. They just felt sorry for you or whatever, which is a totally understandable thing. I don't hold it against anyone. What the hell else are you going to feel like?
Well, yeah,
it was an intense thing. And so part of going to Berkeley was, I would say it was 75% had nothing to do with any of that. It was 75%. I've been doing this my whole life. I love music. It is a logical next step for me to go to Berkeley. And then 25% of I need to change my environment and get away from what has happened here. It was just everything up until my mom passing. Growing up in Cape Coral was amazing. It was such a great nurturing environment with awesome people and great role models. And it was a beautiful area. And I just remember spending so much time having a great time. But when that happened, I couldn't have a great time there anymore. Even now when I go back, last year, the city did this really awesome thing where I came down and did a show outside on basically the main intersection of the town. And it was really sick. A few hundred people came out to see me play drums with my old band. And it was awesome. And but it's hard to be there for me. It was tough to be in that city because it's just tainted by, what was sort of the worst year of my life. So when I went to Berkeley, getting to Berkeley, it was when I got there, I was just ready, man. I was so ready to move on and move forward. And 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 also for my mother, for all the time and energy and money she had spent on making sure that, you know, I had what I needed in music and had great, you know, like just had a good drum set and had good teachers and, you know, and dealt with all of my practicing all the time. I felt like I owed it to her to work as hard as I possibly could at Berkeley. And it was amazing. Like, I can't say enough about, look, Berkeley's not perfect, and music education, oh my God, we could talk about it forever. Like, it's too expensive. Berkeley is too expensive. I'll say it. It just is. Like, they need to figure something out. And there's definitely ways I think that they could improve. For instance, there's, I think, 98% of your time is spent on your instrument, and mastering your instrument. And only, I would say, 2% of that time is spent on, hey, what's going to happen when you're done? What is it like to be an actual working musician? They need to spend more time teaching people what happens when they're done. And guess what? Like, these kids are at Berkeley. They know how to practice, you know? So it's not perfect, but it was unbelievable. And like, when I ran out of money, I dropped out and I went on tour. Like, I didn't have, I was saying, like, she was a single mom. It was a school principal. We didn't have tons of money either. So it was like, I had a scholarship that was great. And when she passed, I got, some like life insurance money that basically all of it went to spent on my education. And so it was like, I did 2.5 years, 5 semesters. And then I was there for like 4 years total, just like living around the campus and playing gigs and stuff.
Right.
But it was an amazing experience. I studied with Kenwood Denard when I was there. He was like my main drum instructor. He played with Jocko and Schofield and tons of amazing musicians, and Herbie, and he was a legend, man. He was on some Mr. Miyagi shit too. Like, sometimes I would go in for a lesson and he would be like, all right, here, play this thing. And I would be like, I can't play that. And then we would just talk about it. We would talk about the approach for 20 minutes.
Really?
We would talk. Yeah, it was total Mr. Miyagi shit. And then he would be like, okay, play it. And I could play it. You know,
wow.
He made me realize, you know, how much of your playing is mental and how much of it is just surrendering to that other part of yourself, that like bigger thing, you know. And that's, I think, what makes great musicians, you know.
Is there an example that maybe you remember? Because that's fascinating to me, like being able to talk about that. And I completely agree. Like, there's definitely moments in life, and kudos to that teacher, by the way, because that's insane to be able to break something down. But you're absolutely right. A lot of the challenges that we face, whether it's music or something else, a lot of it is very mental. And so I'm curious if maybe you remember anything at the top of your head, like an experience where he walked you through it specifically, and maybe you remember like, oh yeah, I remember that one groove or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, he used to talk a lot about, there were like levels of drum sets. You know, there was the drum set that you're playing, and then there's the drum set in your mind. There's the drum set the crowd is hearing. That it's basically an approach to all of the facets of what is happening when music is being played. And that, for some reason, like connected with me. And so like, as far as like a specific groove, I don't know, we did tons of stuff. But there was just something about his approach, to the way that he played that it was one reason I kept signing up to study with him. You know, every semester you can switch to different drum instructors. And for a solid like year and a half or 2 years when I was there, I would sign up for Kenwood every time, because I wasn't in a place at that time. Like, I had been playing drums so long, like I wasn't trying to find the next fill or the next groove idea. I knew how to reach those things. Like, if I wanted to learn a beat, I knew how to get there. The thing that with him was like learning how your soul plays drums. Like, it's a strange thing to talk about. Like, he's also like extremely devout Buddhist, and so his approach is so like it's like borderline spiritual with him with drums. And I think also like growing up in church, you know, I connected with that of like, you know, people like one thing I've noticed in my career is like when people talk or will compliment you, you know, when people compliment you when you're playing after you're done, like they say different stuff, whether it's like, I like that fill or that groove or whatever. Typically what people say to me is like, that felt honest or that felt amazing. Like there was something about when you got on drums, it felt all of a sudden like somber almost, you know, like you really mean what you play. And a lot of that comes from Kenwood and also from Mr. Jones, you know, my original band director. So anyway, yeah, Kenwood Denard, everyone should check him out. There's a really awesome video of him and Jocko and Schofield playing The Chicken. It's the original recording of The Chicken, and you can hear him on that. It's awesome. Yeah,
classic track.
I love that guy. Yeah, straight up. Yeah, that's Kenwood on drums on that track.
You know, it's fascinating. Again, like everything to me, whenever I ask a question, it's because it's fascinating. And I think what you say is something that I think most people write off as something you should know, but no one ever really talks about it, to be honest. And I think he did a phenomenal job explaining to you what it means, because I hear it all the time. You know, people like a lot of legendary drummers and just people online on videos just saying, oh, you got to play with heart. They mention it and then they move on because it's hard to really talk about. And a lot of kids, young kids that are hopefully listening to this and trying to do this, when you start touring, when you start playing live with artists, unless you're playing for some, you know, like avant-garde, really like jazzy group where you're doing tons and tons of fills, as a drummer, most of the time, I would argue at least 80% of the time, you're holding pocket and a groove and with a couple little cool things here and there. But the reality is anyone can play a lot of those grooves. A lot of the drummers that get those awesome tours are the ones that can make it feel really good. And that's something that it's hard to teach. You know what I mean? I feel like you learn that as you go, but it's interesting to me how someone in your life was able to translate that into words and get you to practice that in a way.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think it's one of the things that makes reggae so dangerous. People listen to it and they go, oh, that sounds easy. Nope. It's the hardest thing. It's the hardest thing to play right because it doesn't, you're right. Anyone can play or whatever the beat is. Playing it so that it feels right is a totally different thing, you know? I think if you're talking about pocket, one thing I would encourage anyone listening to do is check out Jay Dilla. All of his beats, he's like the godfather of hip hop, and probably the greatest producer of all time. If you listen to anything that's happening in hip hop now, those producers worship at the idol of Jay Dilla. Like his ability, and he played the MPC freehand. He didn't like quantize his beats. He would play it like an instrument.
Really?
And everything that I've learned about groove sort of came from that, and like listening to like Bob Marley and listening to James Brown. Because between those three, like you'll figure it out. All of a sudden, you'll just be playing and be like, "Oh, that's what it should feel like," you know. And it's especially when you're talking, because like this is one thing I realized, especially like touring with that. After I was done with Berkeley, I did like 3.5 years of touring with this band Air, which was totally not, it was outside of anything I had really done. It was this like hip hop, reggae, indie rock, but essentially like a pop band. You know, they were a very successful band, and it was like, you got to show up. And I was also playing over tracks. Some of those tracks had drums in it. So I had to be perfectly in time. Like enough, like a snare is a very staccato short sound, so it's easy to flam that. If you have two snares, I had to play it so it sounded like one snare, you know. And doing that where it's like what I took away was like, you just got to make people dance, man. Like if you want to play the sort of music that people go, and there's nothing wrong with this, and a lot of people like this, but if you want to play music that makes people go like, ooh, like what was he doing? Or is this very cerebral thing, which I think people confuse. People lump jazz into that a lot, and the best jazz shouldn't be as cerebral. It should be like the pocket where it's like you feel it. But
Yeah.
regardless of any of that, like 95% of the music that I play, it's like, you gotta, I don't know, man. It's gotta come from somewhere deep. And at the end of the day, you shouldn't, at least for me, I don't want to leave people being like, oh my God, that drummer was so killing, like, oh, all those fills. I want them to have danced and grooved and had a great time. You want to be felt, not heard. And then when it's your moment, go for it, man. Play all the licks you want. But it's not about you. That's one thing people need to understand about the drums. It's like 90, most of the time, some bands it is about the drums. But most of the time, it's not about you. You are there to set a foundation for all the other members to stand on. And if you play like that, man, you'll get the gigs. Because like instrumentalists and singers love that. Like so many drummers, I hear it all the time. I hear guitar players and bass players and singers complaining about the drummers.
Yeah.
They're making it about themselves, man. And I think no knock to gospel drumming. Like I love that shit. And that was like such a huge foundation of my playing. But people are going too crazy with it, man. And it's funny because you talk to the best drummers, yeah, like they'll get on Instagram or they'll get on their YouTube channel and play the craziest shit you've ever heard in their life. But guess what? When they go out on giant arena tours, they're playing pocket. Yep. They're not doing stuff because they understand what their job is. And the job is to elevate the rest of the band. Your job is to make them sound as good as you possibly can. It's not about you.
Yeah. And you know what? To add to what you said, I've definitely experienced that too when I play with artists or I go on tour. It's still surprising to me. Whenever I get called to do a gig, I show up and I'm just sound checking and then we play one song and the bassist, guitarist look back at me surprised like, wow, this sounds really, really fucking good. Like, keep doing that. And to me, it's surprising that it's still a thing, even though, like you said, everybody is saying that. Anyone that you've ever looked up to, any famous drummer that's on tour with, I don't know, Mariah Carey or whatever, always say the same thing. Like, hey, hold back. You're there to add that feel, keep time, and make sure that the song feels good. Because, yeah, like you said, any professional understands that the song is what matters. The audience is there to watch a performance. And unless they pay specifically to see you do a drum clinic or like just drums by themselves, they're there to see a band or to see an artist and songs being performed. And if you can understand that, if you can like hold back and understand that you're there to elevate that song to the highest possible level, then man, the sky's the limit for any drummer that can understand that to its core. Yeah.
I think one thing you can do too to better get that is practicing your rudiments. Like I remember playing like double stroke roll from slow to fast to slow and getting it perfect and realizing I'm not doing anything crazy. I'm just and when that gets like trance like, when you just sort of like you elevate, you get above it, you do it for long enough that you forget about what you're doing and your body takes over and your mind starts to do something else. That's the way it should feel when you're really in the pocket, and I don't know, it's important. It's important to groove, man. That's it,
So let me backtrack a little bit. Let me ask you this. For the band Air, I've looked them up too, and they have amazing music, especially when you were playing with them. How did that happen? How did you get hooked up with Air?
I don't know. Their management got in touch with me. I think it was like 4 years. I had been touring with this band Cosmodrome that was like my own group with myself, Madison McFerrin, Finnegan Singer, and Charlie Riddell. It's like this funk R&B band. And we had done a lot of shows, and we were based in Boston. This is when we were all at Berkeley. And I had built up enough of a reputation for myself that I would get calls like that, and it was an amazing experience. I think I was like 20. Yeah, I think I had just turned 20 when they called, and I remember, getting that email. It was like, hey, this is it was Max Greninger, their manager from Foundations. Just, I can't say enough, like phenomenal talent manager. And him emailing me and me looking at the list of, it was like their headline tour, playing all the like House of Blues and all these giant venues, and I was just like, oh my god, this is crazy, And I remember my first show with them was House of Blues Boston, sold out House of Blues Boston. And, this venue I had gone to see so many artists I love, like D'Angelo and Erykah Badu and George Clinton and The Roots and Medeski, Martin and Wood, and even like Deadmau5, like just all these amazing artists I'd seen, and then headlining that thing, it was unbelievable. And I went out on tour with them for like 3.5 years. We did like, I don't know, 300 and some shows in 16 countries or something. It was insane, and it was such a learning experience, man. Like, it was funny because like, I'd been playing drums for so long and I played in 1,000 bands, and I had been on tour before, but there was something about that level of touring where it's like, when it's a huge touring crew. I mean, it's a real production. You've got tour manager and lighting guy and sound guy and a merch guy and all this, and assistant TM plus the band plus a driver for the bus. It was just such an amazing experience from a professional level, like learning what that feels like and what it's like to have to show up for 5 shows a week, and kill it, and also just building those relationships was amazing. Like, when I first started with them, it was a very professional thing. They were my bosses. And that never went away. But at the end of it, they were some of my best friends in the world. I mean, we had done so many shows. We had done the country 6 or 7 times over. It's like when you spend enough time with people like those, that's some of the greatest memories of my life. And it was just such an amazing experience. And, and I've gotten to tour with other bands too. And it's always the same thing. You start off and everyone's a little nervous. First day of tour, you don't know people. It's like first day of school, man, and by the end of it, you're friends for life, unless you're an asshole. That's one thing, man. On some serious shit, like the people, I know players who are phenomenal, great, better than I am, but won't get called for tours because of XYZ. It's important to remember like who you are and what it's like to be some of those tours. You're talking 5, 6, 7, 8 weeks. Some of the biggest tours in the world, they go for like 2 years essentially. Yeah. And you've got to be good people. You have to have integrity. You have to be funny. You have to, if you're dealing with, if something's going on in your life, or you're depressed, or you're in a bad place, you can't let that affect the tour, because there's 12 dudes on a bus. And a tour bus is something I was always so excited about getting to do. Guess what? It's cool for about 3 days, man. And then it's 12 dudes in a 20-foot box for 5 weeks, so it's important to wake up every day. Comes back to the thing my mom said when she dropped me off at school: be respectful and do your best.
Dude, wise words, man. I mean, honestly, it seems like you have so much mental reinforcement, which I can't explain enough how important that is, because as creative people, as musicians, not even as just like professional musicians, just in general, the people that I encounter that are all creative, I feel like there's this gigantic disconnect. In my opinion, obviously, I think other people can prove me wrong, but at least the people that I've encountered, there's a big gap between the people that are professional and the people that are not. And there's obviously not that many professional people compared to how many people do music and creative stuff as a hobby. And one of the things I've come to notice is that mental foundation. You know, it's something that would take hours to really like dive deep and talk about, but to be able to believe in yourself, to be well composed, to respect others, like all these lessons that all these wise people have learned, I've noticed that the people that are not professional usually lack a couple of those, you know, and I think for you, you definitely learned that. And you accepted that as it came along, whether it was through your childhood or maybe some of the teachers that came along in your life. But I'm curious to see, and maybe you don't have a specific answer, but to someone that maybe wants to get to that next level and maybe is lacking something that they feel like they need to get to that level where you were at, is there something that you would suggest that they could practice? Not necessarily musically wise, I mean mental wise, that they could do to get to that place?
No, yeah, totally. One thing Mr. Jones always said, and as I get older, I don't know if it's true, and I feel like it probably is. It's a little extreme when you apply it to music, but he used to tell 12-year-old kids, in any given moment that you're awake in the day, you're either getting better or worse at your instrument. And I applied that to drums for a really long time. And it was one reason I practiced so much and I got to be good at doing this thing I love. But as I got older, I realized he was talking about a bigger concept. You know, it's about like integrity. You know, in any given moment, you're either getting better or worse at being who you are and being the best person you can be. And music's a funny thing, right? Because it's like you're showing a little bit of your soul to people. You're showing a little bit of who you are, and what makes you you. And if you don't know what that is, it's difficult to show it to people. And if you don't love what that is, it's difficult to show it to people because you won't want to. So I think it's important to just work as hard as you can all the time at being great at whatever you want to be great at. But I would suggest starting with your character, you know, and that'll pay off, man.
Can I ask you something interesting? What do you like about yourself? I know it's kind of vague, but I'm curious. I mean, obviously both you and I are always growing and learning different things about who we are, but you absolutely hit it on the mark. You cannot show who you really are if you don't like who you are. And you seem very comfortable with who you are at the moment. And I'm just curious if you ever like think about it, like, what do you like about yourself? I'm just curious. And it's something important for musicians to learn. And that's why I'm asking, because we can spend our whole lives hating ourselves or just being like, nah, I could be better. I'm not good enough. If you never get to the point where you're like, you know what? I know there's things I want to learn, but I like who I am. I like this, and this about me. So I wanted to ask you.
Man, that is maybe the hardest question anyone has ever asked.
And I don't mean to put you on the spot. I'm just curious.
No, totally. It's an amazing question. But I would say this: it's not even about loving or even liking every aspect of yourself. I think it's more about accepting all of it. You know, there was this, I forget who wrote it, but there was this guy who was talking about the concept of 51%. You know, you're constantly in the struggle between 51% of the best version of you that shows love and empathy and compassion and hard work and respect and all those stuff we were talking about. And then there's the 49% of you that's the other thing. You know, and I think everybody deals with that. And so I don't know if there's something I like about myself. I think I'm proud of who, I don't know, of like who I am, of the time that I've put in, and I try and, I don't know, like I try and be respectful to people, and I try and just like wake up, and I totally fail all the time, by the way, but like I know that I tried hard at being the best drummer and friend and whatever that I can be, you know. I think, I don't know, it doesn't even, sometimes it doesn't have to be a specific, like if you could put it down to, this is why I like myself because of A, B, and C. Well, you should probably work on your arrogance, you know. I think it's more of just in any given situation, Then fine. If it had to be a one word answer, it would be the approach, right?
Right.
Like I love my approach to how I deal with situations and trying to remember the people who have taught me what's important and what isn't important.
And I think that's a very good answer. I mean, the reality is, you're right. I think life in general, it's a constant struggle between being the best we are and being the worst that we could be, and obviously it's hard to really be at those extremes, but every day is different. There's constant ups and downs, especially with how messy life can be. But I think what you said is very important, is that I think at being proud of your own approach, being aware, self-aware of how it is that you handle things really helps you along the line. I mean, the reality is, and I say this for anyone that's listening or any young musicians, because I get asked questions like this a lot and I have to find a way to kind of explain what I think, but I want to use what you say to kind of piggyback off of that, is that if you're self-aware enough, obviously we all have shitty moments and we all have great moments, but if you're self-aware of what, makes you better, then you can always keep reminding yourself of that, even on your worst days. And like you said, there will be days where you just can't handle it. There will be days where you'll make mistakes, where it's just something shitty happens. But in the long scheme of things, in the gigantic painting that is your life, in general, you'll end up seeing this like beautiful picture. Whereas, yeah, there'll be little mistakes here and there, but if you can remember to keep on pushing that 51%, that approach, I think it leads to a more fulfilling life, no matter what happens. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And also remember that everybody else is trying to do that too, and they might be having a bad day. I always try and keep that in perspective too. In New York, I live in the city, and you run into so many different types of people. And sometimes you can just tell like someone's in a bad place in their life. And maybe if someone does something you don't like or is unprofessional or whatever, like, yeah, you should not be that way. You should try not to be that way, but you should also try and remember, like, you don't fucking know what's going on with them.
True.
Like maybe what they're dealing with is really hard, So I always try and give people the benefit of the doubt. I always think about, I grew up loving Harry Potter. I read those books like 1,000 times. Nice. And I always was amazed at Dumbledore's ability to see the best and the worst people, to see them as human,
Interesting.
I don't know. That was like my biggest takeaway from all that, is like he trusted people that he shouldn't. And people tended to come to like where he expected them to be, because all of a sudden someone was looking at them, understanding, believing that they would be the best person they could be. And I don't think a lot of people do that, because you get older and you get jaded and people hurt you, right?
Yeah.
And it's hard to trust people, but you should do it because, like you said, it makes your life better.
It does. And obviously it's hard to squeeze in all the reasons why in about an hour or so. But I mean, if you had to take any word from Taylor, it would be that. And I condone that. I definitely support that statement because, I mean, it's just true. You can either go your whole life hating yourself or just hating everything, or viewing the positives. And I think there's a clear distinction between people who are happy and people who are not. Because you will definitely, you will run across tons of people who are successful, who are millionaires. I know I do all the time, who are miserable as fuck, because they didn't figure that out. That core, it is a core thing to know. And it's simple in theory, but it takes hard work to figure that out, to just be positive, know who you are, and see the positive in other people. Because also remember, viewing things negatively, everyone has their own personal view and reasons why they're there. So someone that you could see as a bad guy or like evil, always remember, like, they had a childhood. They probably were in some similar situation you were in. Things lead up to that way, and they make choices that create their point of view. And so I know this maybe to some people may not have anything to do with music, but in my opinion, it has everything to do with music, because it's about your life.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like I said earlier, man, like, you're showing who you are when you play. You should be. Like, that's one thing. Like, look, there's a lot of stuff that you can practice. Like I said, like drummers, like check out Jay Dilla, listen to James Brown, listen to Bob Marley stuff, like learn as much as you can about your instrument. But understand, when it comes to getting out of your practice space and playing a show, it's about showing who you are and leading those people to a beautiful place as best you can. And I think constantly working on who you are as a human being and working on your integrity. And by the way, being positive isn't about like not seeing or ignoring the bad things. It's about like accepting. It's about not like being afraid of those things.
True.
And I think it's the same thing. It's the music thing, and it's all tied together. It's all a story of like who you are as a musician and I would say, yeah, it has everything to do with music. So,
Wise. Dude, you're way too wise for your own good.
I don't know about all that.
No, I mean it, dude. Honestly, those words, spot on, accepting. And so I'm curious, dude. I mean, so you went on this big tour, right? You had your experience with Berkeley, which sounded pretty cool. A lot of things that you learned from there. What are you up to nowadays? I mean, I hear through the grapevine that I think you're working on an album. I think you told me about that. So like, what are you up to?
Yeah, I'm making an album. I got done with, all that tour. And I had, between Cosmodrome and Air, and everything I had done in high school, like I had just been on tour for so long that I took a little bit of time off. I started a software startup. It's called Savvy, and we totally got our asses kicked by this company called Clarity Money that was started by the Dell brothers, started Dell Computers. But it was essentially artificial intelligence software for personal finance. It was totally outside the music world. I wanted to do something else. I said, I'll give this a year. And I got done with it. And I learned so much from starting a business and all that. And I realized, all right, how do I take what I learned from all this and putting a team together and product development and learning about what it takes to make a business work? How do I take that back to the music industry? And what the hell do I want to do now? For me, it was like a really tough decision of what's the next step, because I'd always wanted to play giant shows. That was sort of as far as it went for me. And I wanted to play good music. And between Cosmodrome and Air, I had sort of achieved that thing, that very immature, childlike desire to be on drums in front of a giant crowd of people. And so I wanted to know what the next thing was. And I had just been like really interested in all the music I was listening to wasn't musicians' music. It wasn't necessarily crazy music, and I've been like watching a ton of movies and getting into the idea of storytelling. And so that for me was like, well, I should make a record. This is a new scary thing, something I haven't done, something people don't know me for. And it's always about challenging yourself to go to the next thing. So about a year ago, I said, all right, I'm going to do this. And, the basic premise of the record, was two-pronged. It was like, I know so many amazing, talented musicians, songwriters, producers, and artists. So I wanted to bring those people together. And so I have different groups that I'm writing with, that I might get a few songs out of this group and a few songs out of that group. And then working with different producers to take the bones that I write, with these groups of musicians, and turn it into something that's produced and polished and sounds really good. And then obviously, like, I'm not a singer. That's the toughest thing. It's like I'm making a record, but I'm not going to sing on it. So bringing in artists to come lay that top part, that top line on it, and obviously like working with them on melody and lyrics. I think there was some sound issues. Did you get all that? You still there?
Yeah, I'm still there. I'm still here.
Okay, cool. And then, the other part of that is just telling your story. My friend Joanna Teeters, who has this band, used to be called Mad Sata, and now it's, I think, just Joanna Teeters. Everyone should go check her out. Her music's amazing. But we had a writing session a while ago, and she was just like, man, you got your whole life to release your first record, and she gave me a lot of really good advice about, you're a good enough musician that if you say you're going to make a funk song, you're going to make a great funk song. Or you want to make a hip hop tune, you're going to make a great hip hop tune. But the thing that people are going to connect with the most is your story, because that's the thing people don't understand. They don't know about, because you're the only person that can tell that story. So that was sort of where it was. It's like I've had all these life experiences, and between growing up and Berkeley and being on tour and being surrounded by so many great sounds and great people and whatever, that I felt like I was ready to, not that the record is necessarily going to be about that stuff, but just taking some of that energy and putting it into something. So yeah. That's the record. I have no idea what it's going to be called yet. We don't have a title for it, but I'm going to finish probably like 40 songs, then nail it down to like 10 or 11. And so I'm working on it all the time, man. I'm really stoked about it. It's cool. Like so far, It's dope because like I like it. You know, you get burnt out on a song. I don't know how much time you've done like being in the studio and working on tunes, but you get really burnt. You get burnt out, and you're like, oh, I hate this song. Like I've listened to it on repeat for 300 times. Like I got to, and you don't listen to it for a couple weeks, and you come back to it, and you're like, oh, cool. This is sick.
True. Well, walk me through a little bit of like the songwriting process, just because from a drummer's perspective, like I have definitely helped with songwriting sessions before, like because I can play piano and I can produce a little bit, like I'm able to do that. But for someone who maybe isn't well versed in songwriting and they're just completely, tour guys, or they're just playing live shows all the time.
Yeah.
Walk us through a little bit of your songwriting process. Obviously you're working with some top liners, and then you take that and you maybe try and produce like a rough demo, I'm assuming. And so I'm just curious, like what your specific process is to get one of those 40 songs done.
Well, it's different for every song, but like an example from what I'm working on like this week is I started with recording a drum part. Like I'll play until I can, like, I don't know if you've done this. I'm sure, people listening, maybe you'll be sitting playing a groove in your, practice space or whatever, and you hear the song. I don't know if you've ever had that. Where like you hear all the other parts. And sometimes you don't get a melody line or you don't get whatever, but I'll sit and play a groove and be like, okay, I think I hear where I want this to go. Record that groove. And then I'll bring it to a group of people, whatever musicians I happen to be working with at the time, and be like, okay, so here's sort of what I'm feeling. So I'll play a bass part or I'll play a keys part or whatever. And sometimes they'll be like, yeah, that's perfect. That's the perfect thing, and then sometimes they'll be like, well, what about this? And that's just sort of the process of working it out until you're happy or they're happy. And typically if they like it, then I know that I did the right thing. And if they have something to offer 10 times out of 10, it's a better thing because like they play that instrument, and they're better than I am at it. And so that's one way that it starts. Some ways is sitting on the keys or sitting on guitar and just playing a progression until, a melody starts to happen. And then sometimes the drums are the last thing to come in, because it's not necessary when you're writing that thing. You can feel the rhythm. And also, like, I swear I'm going to do this. I want at least one of the songs on the album not to have any drums, which is funny. It's like drummer makes an album with no drums. But some of my favorite tunes don't have drums, and you don't always need it.
I mean, Phil Collins, dude. Phil Collins, one of his most famous songs, but was it I Can Feel It Coming in the Air Tonight? I mean, half of that song has no drums.
Well, it also has the greatest drum fill of all time. So.
Of course. Has no drums for half the song and then creates fucking drumming history halfway through. But even still, like, the drum beat is fairly simple, though. Phil Collins is a really, really good drummer. And when you hear that song, if you didn't know who Phil Collins was and then someone told you, oh yeah, he's a legendary drummer, I don't think you would know that, because the song is so poppy and so simple that it's hard to imagine that a drummer would write that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, totally. I feel that. That story too of him playing for Genesis and then becoming the singer is just insane. Yeah. It's definitely a cool story. I heard recently that he's been having such bad arthritis that he can't play drums anymore, which is so heartbreaking.
I know. Because,
if you talk about a drum fill to people who don't play music and they'll be like, do, 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 do. That's the fill that people think of, Yeah. So I don't know. It's cool, man. But as far as the process of writing, it's different for every song. I think it's just about throwing stuff at the wall and trying to get outside of your comfort zone and trying to do new things, so. And it's cool too, because like the first 8 months of this was me just trying to write as many songs as I could. And I was like, oh man, this all sounds so different. Some of the songs would sound like K Tronada. Some of the stuff would sound like Tame Impala. Some of the stuff would sound like Alabama Shake. Some of the stuff would sound, like all over the place. And it took a while for me to find my voice and be like, what is a Taylor Robinson record supposed to sound like? Like what is this? What do I want to do musically? It's about having like sometimes it's good to come with no expectations, but sometimes it's good to say, what is my sound? Like, what do I want? You got all these instruments and all these options. Sometimes it can be bad to just get lost in whatever groove or feel you're happen to be into at the time. Sometimes that can be good, but sometimes it's important to come with intent of saying, this is sort of what I want to do with this song, and really like trying to put your hands in there and mold it into something intentional, versus sometimes it's good to do the total opposite. That's one thing I've learned. And also like I said, man, I'm new at this, and I've been lucky enough to be surrounded by amazing songwriters, that I've learned from and who I've collaborated with that have been doing this for years. And so I think I've been able, and just trying to learn and soak up like a sponge as much of what they've learned as possible. I think it's been really fortunate for me to have that group of people, because I've learned a lot in a short period of time, so it's cool because like, I'm hoping to come out of the gates with something that I'm really proud of, something people like, because first album's hard.
It's very hard. And I think you're owning it like a champion. You're approaching it in a way where you can learn, and you have a great team of people surrounding you. And I think that's important, not just in making an album, but in any kind of project. Having the right people surrounding you and having the right approach is vital to the success to your project.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely, man.
Yeah. Well, honestly, dude, I can't thank you enough for doing this with me. Like, I love this conversation. I had no idea where it's going to go. And here's the thing. I think I've said this a couple times in the podcast, but sometimes it's so easy to try and get into like a pattern and just like, hey, here's question 1, here's question 2. But what I've come to love and to learn is to just get to know my guests. And because everyone's story is different, just like you're saying, like everyone has their own unique story. And my goal is to just like tell it in a different way and just help inspire someone out there that maybe is going through the same thing that you went through. And I think you did a phenomenal job. And I had no idea that you're just fantastic, dude. You're like a philosopher, badass / entrepreneur / drummer. I mean, insert other things here. Like you're basically a really good jack of all trades, man.
Well, thanks, man. I appreciate it. And I'm happy to be here, man. This is a great conversation. You asked awesome questions.
Oh, well, thank you. Well, to wrap it up, I think we did a lot of really good topics, and honestly, I couldn't be any happier. But if you had to like sum it up, maybe like give like a quick little 1-minute advice to someone that wants to be where you're at, maybe wants to go on tour, maybe even is interested in going to music school or whatever, trying to figure themselves out. What would you advise a young musician trying to figure themselves out and trying to get to the next level?
Yeah, well, I would say, put the work in. I think if you're looking for all the answers of where to go next, it's like existentialism is a dangerous road. Get back to work. It's a really awesome quote from Casey Neistat that I love. Like it's important to worry about where you're going and what you want and what you want to achieve and all those things. It's important questions to ask, but you don't find the answers by just sitting on your ass. You find the answers by putting the work in. And trying new things and working as hard as you possibly can. So if you're a drummer, get in there and work on all the facets of becoming a better drummer, whether it's rudiment stuff or groove stuff or feel things, and try different types of music. Learn as much as you can about Brazilian music and funk music and hip hop and jazz and rock. And just if you want to be a student of music, remember you're a student, try and learn as much as you can all the time. And you may find that when those, if you want to know what the next move is, just put your head down and all of a sudden you'll be somewhere.
How true. Dude, well, thank you so much. Again, can't thank you enough for your wise words. I'm really happy we got a chance to meet and to finally get this conversation going, because we've been trying for a while. And so it was well due. It was overdue, and I'm excited for it, dude. And I would tell you, or I would wish you luck, but you don't need it, dude. You don't fucking need luck. You make your own luck happen. And I couldn't be any prouder of you. And I've only recently just met you, and I feel like I know you really well.
Eddie, it was an honor to be on the podcast, man. I had a blast. Thanks for having me.
I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Taylor. I definitely learned a lot from him, and it reminded me a lot about the lessons that I have been learning these past couple years, and I hope that you guys also picked up some of those. You know, the reality is when it comes to music and when it comes to careers, we can spend a lot of time working hard and really just always punching and pushing our objectives forward. But the reality is you have to make sure that your approach to life is also equally balanced, because the truth is you are going to come across challenges. If there's any takeaway from this conversation, is learn how to approach life the right way. The approach is incredibly vital to your success. And it doesn't matter if it's not a specific way. It doesn't matter if your approach is not exactly like Taylor's. Everyone's approach is different. Mine is too. But spend time learning how to do it your way, how to do it the way that makes you happy. And I guarantee you that you'll find plenty of success. So if you really like this episode, press that subscribe button. I've got lots of great other episodes coming your way.